I think it's entirely appropriate that we would begin with Pierre to set out for us some of the Commission thinking. He has a presentation you'll see on PowerPoint, and perhaps if there's any wider comments not directly related to your presentation, Pierre, please feel free to contribute, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President. If you allow me, I will switch in my mother tongue, which is French. The best one is this one, yes. Being also responsible for multilingualism. Comme l'a dit le Président.
As President Cox has said, you're all aware of the political context and the crisis we're in. So the first thing I want to say is that as far as the European Commission is concerned, our message on education is that the absolute priority for education at the moment is to facilitate access to the labour market. And this is quite a serious matter. When we talk to the academic world with professors and university directors. Now, of course, education isn't just about facilitating access to the market. It's also about transferring knowledge and developing citizens and the understanding of citizenship. However, at the moment, the urgency is to rethink our education and training systems, because there is a problem between, or there's a mismatch between the world of education and the labour market. There aren't enough links. This is part of the strategy that Mr. Cox mentioned, Europe 2020 Growth and Jobs. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether or not this strategy has been successful. It was tabled just before the crisis, and obviously the crisis has changed things. Nevertheless, I do think the strategy is still valuable, even to help us get out of the crisis. And there are two things I want to say here. The Commission says very clearly that investment into education, research and innovation are all key success factors for growth and jobs. So we shouldn't see education as an expenditure, but far more as an investment for growth and employment in the future. And the second thing we say in the Europe 2020 strategy is that we have to stop making general statements. For example, education is important, but everyone knows that education is important. The Commission hasn't invented anything new with that. Now, the idea is to make country-specific recommendations, to go through country by country and maybe flag up the university system or the vocational training system or even pre-primary schooling. That's where a particular country should focus. So we're now taking a much more specific country-by-country approach. And this is something completely new. 20 years ago, in the Commission, the Parliament and the Council, education was just about Erasmus. Now, of course, that's very good and we have to continue with that. But for the rest, education was an exclusively national preserve. And of course, that's still true. That's what's in the treaties, that it's a national competence. Nevertheless, it is something that's beginning to have an impact on growth and employment in Europe. Furthermore, in Europe 2020, we have developed many ideas around this. And why do we need to rethink education? Well, there are three main reasons for this. First of all, we need better qualified people. Secondly, education systems aren't really providing what we need. And thirdly, even when it comes to basic competences, the situation in Europe isn't very good at all. So these 3 points then, the qualifications required. And there have been many changes in global society and in European society, namely the fact that we're going to need better qualified people. Everyone knows this, it's nothing new, but if we look at jobs and occupations, they're changing towards higher skilled people. And in fact, we have scientific demonstration of this. We've carried out studies. Our agency, CEDEFOP in Thessaloniki, carries out scientific research on the trends. Maybe what you can see here with the dark blue, in 2000 it goes from 50 million people with high qualifications to 80 million in 2020. However, if you take the light blue, it goes from 63 million jobs in 2000, low-skilled jobs, to 42 million. That doesn't mean those low-skilled jobs will disappear, and it doesn't mean that we should overlook the people in those jobs. But it is important to be aware of the major trends and the changes taking place. And if we look now at the way education has been able to meet that demand, we can see that we're actually far from satisfactory. On this graph, you can see at the top you've got the highly skilled people, 27%, and at the bottom you've got the poorly skilled people, 27%. So at the moment there is some kind of balance, but we know that the labour market is going to require more highly skilled people in the future. The second reason now, young people sometimes don't even have the necessary basic skills. The situation is quite alarming, actually, in Europe. And you could say that it's a continent with a long tradition of education, old universities, etc. But if you have a closer look at a particular example, let's say reading, in the middle here, you've got the European average, and that's 20% of people who are not sufficiently skilled in one of the basic competences, such as reading, in Europe. Whereas our aim, which isn't even that ambitious, is 15%, so we're still quite far away from that objective. And now some comments more linked to the individual countries. And if you look at the average, you can see that the 3 countries, or the 5 countries just around the average, are the UK, Germany, Spain, France, Italy. So those are the 5 countries that are around the average. And obviously that average is really not satisfactory. And if you go to the other end of the spectrum, you can see that Finland, everyone knows this, Finland does the best. And then there's Poland, the 4th. Poland's in 4th place. And I apologise if there's any Poles here in the room, but 20 years ago, Poland didn't actually fare very well here, but they introduced major reforms, just like Finland did as well. Poland introduced reforms and is now getting to the top of the ranking. So the lessons we can draw from this are that countries that do engage in reforms achieve results. And if we look at the other end of the spectrum, I don't think there'll be any surprises. Romania and Bulgaria are countries where there's still a lot that needs to be done. But there isn't only the level of competence that's important. There's also the very dramatic situation of early school leaving in Europe. I would say that for the last 3 years, the European Union has said that this is a major priority, that we should avoid early school leaving. And that's something the heads of state and government deal with every year, and the ministers of education discuss it. And every year we need to show progress. But I just want to draw your attention on a couple of things on the slide. Now, first of all, the aim of 10% in 2020. 10% as a maximum of early school leavers leaving school without any qualifications. At the moment, if you look at the black line, we're around 13.5%. We were at 15% 3 years ago, so we are making progress. And to be honest, that's already not a bad thing, because these matters are not easy to solve. Now, if there were a miracle cure to stop early school leaving, I'm sure everyone would have done it already. But with all the migratory factors and young people that need motivation, sometimes people want to leave school early to start working, but there are no jobs. So there's a lot of complex factors at play here, families, parents. So we are making progress. And the last interesting point on this slide is that it isn't just a European objective. Now, we do have a European benchmark for this, but each head of state has decided that the individual countries should set their own objectives. These are the lozenges you can see. That's very important, because every year each country has to look at how they're doing according to their own objectives and whether or not they need to adopt more measures. But the average objective for Europe is that we should have 10% early school leaving.
L'autre bout du spectre, c'est l'autre but que nous nous sommes fixés dans la stratégie Europe 20.
The other objective with the 2020 strategy is to encourage people to be more qualified, which will be 40% of young people finishing university education. That's the second objective that Europe set. And again, it's monitored by heads of state every year. At the moment, we've reached 34%. So again, we're making progress. You'll see each country has their own spot on the map. Some are close to their goal, some aren't. I don't want to blame and shame some of the countries, but I would just say that if you look at the first country, perhaps you can't see it very well, but that's Italy. It's not Romania, Italy. So this type of monitoring allows every state to compare itself with the others. And we know that Italy has taken a certain number of measures to try to improve the number of students who finish their studies. Sadly, this has also been impacted by the crisis, and that's led to a certain number of impediments as well. So they were the problems. So now moving on to the solutions. We have a political document that's just been approved by the college. We've proposed 3 actions. The first of these is on skills of the 21st century. Secondly, more open schools and universities. And the third area is on funding for education. And I'm going to develop these 3 ideas now. On skills, we have transversal skills and basic skills. So let's look at transversal skills. We want to help to develop a business mindset. We think that's very important, and education has a key role to play here. The graph here shows people who have the skills necessary to start up a small business, and you can see there aren't that many. And what's quite surprising is that Denmark has the lowest rate. You might have thought that Denmark was a country with a long tradition of this kind of thing, but developing a business mindset and education for business. Secondly, languages. Very important for culture, interpersonal relations, and also for employability. In individual countries and also in Europe. I'm sure you're all aware of the situation in Spain, where graduates don't find jobs, whereas in Berlin they're trying to recruit people. All different sectors are trying to recruit. So sadly, English isn't enough. Of course, you need English. Our education systems aren't very good at teaching languages. If you look inside the square there in the middle, what that shows is that 42% of young people in secondary level education have a independent user level of a language, a reasonable level after 5, 6, 7 years of teaching. That's only 42%.
Ça veut dire qu'il y en a 60%, 50.
So what that means is that there's almost 60%, 58, who have only a basic level. And if you look at the graph again, between the far right of the graph and the left, we're not talking about politics here, but there's a factor of 8. The best country, Sweden, is 8 times better than the worst country, which the worst countries are the UK and France. And there's a 8-fold increase in language efficiency. Now, it's not just about teachers. We don't want to get into a long debate about teaching foreign languages in the United Kingdom, but there's a whole series of factors that come into play in this. So language teaching must be another priority for us. Then moving on to this graph, that's slightly more complicated. That's the issue of computer skills. Here, young people are increasingly competent, but at the same time, you have generations of adults who have considerable difficulties when it comes to ICT skills. But we don't just need to look at the basic skills. There's another aspect that I would like to draw your attention to, which is very important, and that's vocational training. This is quite a simple graph, but very important nonetheless. It's the number of young people who are in vocational training. If you look at the European average, you can see that it's 50%. 50% of young people are in vocational training. Here, it's young people between the ages of 16 and 18 years old. And not enough weight is given to that. School isn't the only way. It's not just schools and university. We also have all this type of vocational training, which is working excellently in certain countries. For instance, Germany, Austria, Denmark. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But there are other countries where it's considered, second, third rate education, where employers don't see it as attractive, or where parents are disappointed if their children decide to undertake vocational training. So we need to change mindsets and also improve the quality of vocational training. And coming back to school leavers, if we accept that there are going to be 10% of early leavers, and we accept that fortunately 40% of people will have university degrees, that still leaves 50% who aren't in either of those two categories, and they are found mainly in here. And moving on to the next slide, this deals with the issue of work-based learning. So after vocational training, well, if you just stay in the institutions that only teach, that's not really enough. That's the experience that we've seen in Denmark. That's experience that's been proved to be the case in Germany and in Austria and Hungary. Work-based learning, so a dual system which combines not just 6 months here, 6 months in the other place, but every week you have a combination of schoolwork and work in a company. They're the systems that work the best. If you look at Denmark, Germany and Austria, they're the countries with the lowest young people's unemployment rate. So there's a very strong correlation between this way of tackling vocational training and the rate of unemployment for young people. In fact, next week in Berlin, there's going to be an initiative undertaken by German ministry, but also other ministries. And this is at the behest of Spain, Greece, Italy, and all those countries which have less well-performing vocational systems. There's going to be a summit to see why that works in these countries, not just because they want to cut and paste the system from one to another. The German culture is very different from Spanish culture, but they just want to take inspiration from what is working best in certain countries. Another area we're working on is opening up school, opening up university. And we have two main proposals here. The first is the effect of the internet. We think that the impact of the internet on schools and universities is going to be considerable, as it already has been in banks, in day-to-day life, in cinema, in culture. You can see the effect of the internet. But what effect will and is in fact the internet already having on education? What we're seeing increasingly is open educational resources on the internet. So you have the big universities using their brand, their name, Harvard, MIT, to give lessons over the internet. So you have people who follow online courses. You hear of MOOCs, massive open online courses. So there's increasingly this idea that you can have followed courses online. And what this means is that teachers can work together as a network to take inspiration from one another and to exchange good internet experiences. We think that this is another thing that will have a major impact on the 21st century university education system. And in fact, we're going to be coming out with proposals next year about this. There are a lot of questions and a lot of issues that are going to have to be solved at European level. Just a few examples: IPR, intellectual property rights. This is something that's under European Union competency. Then the recognition of qualifications that have been achieved over the internet. And individual member states can't do anything about that. It's going to have to be done at European level. And then also the fact that schools and universities are going to have to modernise, and through, in particular, structural funds, we can help them with this modernisation. Then one final thing I'd like to draw your attention to is about teachers. This graph shows that 1/3 of current teachers are going to be taking their retirement in the next 10 years. That's good news for them, I think, after a long career. But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the European Union and its member states to rethink teacher training. Secondary and primary school teachers were trained in a certain period, and things have changed since then. So we're working with countries to see how we can help them to rethink, to modernise teacher training. The final point I would like to draw your attention to is funding for education and for training. This is in the broader sense of the words training and education, lifelong learning and education. Thinking about it, if you want to improve the skills levels of all of our citizens, if we want to ensure that everybody has a basic skill set, if we want to see a society where people live longer, probably work longer, then they're going to have to engage in lifelong learning. And if we want to modernise education systems, then the question is quite simple: who's going to pay for it? And in particular, who's going to pay for it at the moment when a lot of countries are being forced to cut their funding for education? That's the case in Greece, Portugal, Spain. Cuts are being made. We hear words like growth-friendly, but in practice we know that there are at least 7 or 8 countries which are going to be forced to cut. So we want to work with member states to look and think about these issues relating to funding and about how funding can be shared. Public authorities have to fund schools, but they can't fund everything. Business is going to have to contribute as well. Civil society can help. Individuals, if they want to be involved in lifelong learning, perhaps they can contribute to the cost of it as well. Now, we're going to have to come up with some kind of a model, because behind this, all these issues of funding, we have tuition fees, a lot of very sensitive issues, and we don't want to impose anything on member states. But what do we want to say to member states is that this is a major challenge, and you are going to have to think about how you fund your education systems. So they were the thoughts I wanted to share with you today. We've put all of this in a political document, which was published about 10 days ago. There are lots of documents from the service, from the DG, from Mr. Barroso, to show us the studies, analysis by country. It has a number of proposals, and in particular a series of clear messages to member states, which I've shared with you, and also Commission initiatives. I'll quickly run over those. We have country-specific focus. We want to work with the OECD for an education and skills online assessment so people can assess their own skills online. We're going to also propose a benchmark for languages to try to improve the situation there. We want to have an alliance for apprenticeships. That's work-based learning that I was talking about. We want to make real progress in moving towards a European area for skills and qualifications, because people have to be able to move throughout Europe with their skills and qualifications and have those recognised. Then there's the issue of funding education and opening up national debates on that. And next year, we will be coming up with a follow-up to this communication on modernisation, particularly with regard to internet and education for business. And just going back to the beginning, to strengthen the partnership between the world of education and the business world. And I can say that we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you.